All right, Rabbi, say good morning. Let us begin. I want to begin by thanking our sponsors. I thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Shvat, the Elbaum Mishpacha, for dedicating all of the Shiurim and Droshos this month in memory of Jerry Elbaum, Yaakov Kappel ben Avram Menachem Zichron Levrach. We open that in the merit of our Talmud Torah. The Neshama will have an aliyah, and the family a nechama. To thank Bracha Strimber for dedicating all of the Shurman Drushos this month in loving memory of her husband Avi, Avram ben Kalman Eliezer Halevi, Zichron Livracha. We thank our week of learning sponsors, Moshe and Ellen Gevant, in the merit of and Ellen's mother, Joyce Rubin Blackman, Nechama Bas Shalom Yitzchak, on the occasion of her third yard site on the 12th of Shvat. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, the Neshamas will have an aliyah and the family in Nechama. We also thank our week of learning sponsors, the Getz Mishpacha, in memory of Moshe Chaim's father and mother, Alter Hirsch ben Binyamin, and Chana Chaya Bas Moshe, as well as thanking Mr. Larry Sufnis for dedicating the week of learning in memory of his beloved wife Tanya, Yona Bas Yaakov. We thank our Day of Learning sponsors, Eli and Joel Rashkovsky, for dedicating the learning today for the yard site of Joel's grandmother, Shoshana Bas Shlomo. We hope in the merit of our Talmud Torah, all of the neshamas will have an aliyah and the families a nechama. But I also just really want to give a very special thank you to Maishi and to Jeremy, who are working so hard on constantly improving our tech setup. So Chevra on Zoom, you think the magic happens easily, but Baruch Hashem, there's and not just for the Chevra on Zoom. The truth is, for those who are on YouTube and for those who use the podcast and access the YouTube video later on, it's a ridiculous amount of work that goes in to making this a really excellent product. And I really want to thank Maishi and Jeremy for the days and the nights, for putting up with my ignorant feedback when it comes to technology matters, but yet receiving it and implementing it so graciously. I will say thank you both very much. And I will say really, with everyone from the Shir, when you see these two guys, make sure to give them an incredible yashikoach. From the beginning of the pandemic, mamish, from the beginning, when we had to switch to an online platform, they've been working really yomam v'layla on this stuff. So we'll say thank you both very, very much. All right, we'll say with that, let us begin. So today's daf is Samech Daled 64. We'll say we really have an incredible daf today. Really incredible daf. I know I built it up a lot. I hope I could deliver on this. But in Mirz Hashem, we are picking up on Samech Gimel Amadei 63b. We're going to pick up at the Orminhi. So 5 lines up from the bottom. Orminhi. Hashochet es ha-pesach alo-chametz. If one goes ahead, so we'll remember again, that was the topic of the Mishnah. The topic of our Mishnah in yesterday's daf was speaking about the concept of shechting karbanos. First, we're talking about Karban Pesach, then Karbanos in general, while one is in possession of chametz and ramifications of engaging in such behavior. So the Gemara says, Ramin, raise the kasha. Hashochet es ha-pesach alo-chametz. If one goes there and shechts the Karban Pesach while in possession of chametz, over below sase, one is in violation of ilav. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, af ha-tamid. Rabbi Yehuda says, even if you shech the tamid, not just the Karban Pesach, but even if you shech the tamid while in possession of chametz, it's problematic as well. Amr lo amru ela b'pesach b'vod. The Chum said back to Rabbi Yehuda, no, it's not true. This halacha is only said legabe Karban Pesach, not legabe other karbanos. Emasai. When is this so? This is only true, said, if one of the people intimately involved in the carbon was in possession of chametz. So, for example, the person shechting, the person doing the zrika, or one of the chabura, one of the members of the chabura, ultimately, again, in possession of chametz. But if someone at the end of the world, and those are both say, obviously, is there a possibility that there's always going to be someone in possession of chametz? Sure. But lemaisa, again, when do we say that possession of chametz is problematic? When shechting the carbon, that's only if someone involved in the actual carbon itself, with the shchita, with the zrika, one of the members of the chabura. But hayya le'echa b'sof ha'olam, I will say, if somebody in the world has chametz, ein zakuk lo. Ultimately, again, that does not pose a problem. Ve'echad ha'shochet, ve'echad ha'zorg, ve'echad ha'molek, ve'echad ha'mazeh chayiv. And I will say, listen to this. Now the Bryce is expanding this. And whether you're doing shchita, zrika, malika, also remember again, malika is the process of shechting a bird, right? Where a bird's not really shechted, but rather again, the Kohen inserts his thumbnail into the back of the neck of the bird and kind of flips the head off like that. So the Gemara says, or the sprinkling of the blood, chayiv. All of these individuals, if they are in possession of chametz while doing these avodas, are chayiv. Avol, but we'll see, interestingly enough, as much as we're talking about that, according to Rabbi Yehuda, that there's an opinion that not just Karban Pesach, but that other Karbanos as well are going to be chayiv if you do it in the possession of chametz. It's not true by Kamitza. Kamitza is the process by Karban Mincha, in which the Kohen takes his 3 middle fingers, scoops up some of the flour mixture, offers that up on the Karban. On the Mizbeach, I'm sorry. Aval HaKometz HaMincha, Eino over below sase. Then you're not in violation of anything. Similarly, again, if one goes ahead and burns the leftover fats and limbs on the mizbeach, again, when one is in possession of chametz, Eino over below sase. One is not in violation of any kind of lo sase. So we'll say, okay, so that's the end of that brayso. At top of Samech Dalid, Kashya Malika Malika, Kashya Aktar Aktar. So we'll say we have 2 contradictory statements now, right? Ultimately, again, the brayso that we just quoted before. So, right, one source tells me that I'm chayiv for doing malika if I own chametz, and one source told me that I'm not. Kashyak taraktar, similarly again when burning of the leftover limbs and fats. One source tells me that I'm not chayiv if I do that when in possession of chametz, and one source says that I was. Uletamech tikshilacha hi gufa diktani lo amru ela b'pesach bilvad. You will say the brayso we just quoted itself is inherently contradictory. Why? Because at first the brayso said the only time that it's problematic to possess chametz when engaging in sacrificial service is only by the actual offering of the Karban Pesach itself. V'hadar tani echad hashochet ve'echad hazorik ve'echad hamolik ve'echad hamazeh. And then I will say, after you say that, then the same brayso says, whether you shecht, whether you do zrika, whether you do malika, whether you do hazal, sprinkling, if you're in possession of chametz by any of these avodos, which clearly indicates to us that even avodos beyond the Karban Pesach, there is liability for possession of chametz. So what's going on over here? Ella, hava Rabbi Shimon. Rather, you have to say both opinions are Rabbi Shimon. So what do you do about the contradiction of Malika? Malika lo kasha. There's no contradiction by Malika. Kan ba'arba kan bicholol shomoet. You're supposed to listen to this. When you do Malika and are in possession of chametz, if you're doing the Malika on the 14th, you're going to be pater. But if you're doing Malika during Pesach in possession of chametz, that's when you are going to be chayiv. V'idi Rabbi Shimon hi haktar namilo kasha. Similarly, again, the cases of haktar, the burning of the leftover limbs and fats, is also not a contradiction. Tanoihi, ultimately, again, that is a machlokes tanoim. Di'ika demakish haktar l'shchita, di'ika manda lo makish. Rabbi say, what's the machlokes based on? Do you compare haktara to shchita? So if you compare haktara to shchita, that just as there is liability for shchita while in the possession of chametz, there will be liability for haktara while in the possession of chametz as well. But if you do not equate haktara to shchita, then ultimately, again, although there is liability for haktara, there will not be liability for shchita. Okay, Rabbi Yehuda Omer Af HaTamid. So remember, Rabbi Yehuda holds, as we just quoted before as well, Rabbi Yehuda holds that not only is there liability for shechting the Karban Pesach while in possession of chametz, but there will be liability for shechting the Karban Tamid while in possession of chametz as well. My time with Rabbi Yehuda. What is Rabbi Yehuda's logic? Where does he get this from? Amar Lacha. The pasuk says zivchi. But the pasuk that he's quoting over here is lo sizbach al chametz dam zivchi, which is the pasuk, one of the psukim that we learn to use, that you cannot go ahead and offer up a karban ultimately while in possession of chametz. Listen to Rabbi Yehuda's drasha. He says zivchi. Rabbi says zivchi is possessive. Zevach hameyuchad li. The pasuk is referring to the karban that is uniquely mine. And what is that referring to? What's the karban that's uniquely belonging to HaKadosh Baruch Hu? Ma'nihu tamid. That refers to the karban tamid. Therefore, Rabbi Yehuda learns out from that pasuk to say that if you possess chametz on Erev Pesach when offering the karban tamid, ultimately, again, one will be chayev for that. Rabbi Shimon Omer HaPesach Barbar. So remember again, this is towards the end of the Mishnah. So here you have Rabbi Shimon saying, the quote was Rabbi Shimon Omer Pesach Bar Basra l'shmo chayiv v'shalo l'shmo pater. So Rabbi Shimon said that if you offer up the Pesach on the Erev Pesach and l'shmo, you'll be chayiv shalo l'shmo pater, like we saw in yesterday's daf. Ushara kol hazvachim, but all other karbanos bein lishman ben shelo lishman pater. So it says, my time is Rabbi Shimon. What's Rabbi Shimon's logic? Tichsiv zivchi trei zmani. So we'll say, remember again, interestingly enough, the word zivchi comes up in two different psukim. So the first pasuk is lo sizbach al chametz dam zivchi, and the second pasuk is lo sishchat al chametz dam zivchi. So the Gemara says kari be zevach zevachai. So we'll say this is actually very interesting. So Rabbi Shimon will say that ultimately, again, it comes to teach me that you combine the two zivchis ultimately, again, for a statement of zivachai. Look at Rashi. But just actually, you don't have to look at Rashi yet. So zivachai, which comes, I will say, to include a much more all-encompassing group of karbanos. So why is it that the Torah goes ahead and separates the two zivchis? Why not put them together? V'lo ksiv zivachai. In other words, both say Rabbi Shimon's coming along to say as follows. Rabbi Shimon's coming to say that halacha lemaisa shar kol azvachin bein lishman bein shelo lishman pater. So Rabbi Shimon's coming to go ahead and teach a principle about karbanos in general, and he gets that principle from the fact that it says zivchi zivchi. If you were to put those two words together, you would get zivachai, my karbanos, plural, all encompassing. To which the Gemara says, okay, well, if that's the case, why not write zivachai? Why not bring them together? To which the Gemara says, I'll tell you, lemeimar bisman diika zevach. Lo mechayiv azvachai, to teach me that at a time where there is the zevach, now the zevach in question over here is actually a reference to Karban Pesach. So when there is a zevach, i.e. on Erev Pesach, lo mechayiv azvachai, then ultimately again you will not be chayiv for offering other karbanos with chametz. Bizman deleka zevach, but where there is no Karban Pesach, which means if you were to offer up these karbanos on Pesach itself, while in the possession of chametz, mechayiv azivachai, then ultimately again you would be chayiv for offering other karbanos with chametz during Pesach as well. Good. Ubemoid l'shmo pater. So we'll say, so remember again, the Mishnah then went on to say, Ubemoid l'shmo pater, shalo l'shmo chayiv, that if you go ahead and you offer up the Karban Pesach on Yom Tiv, or really it means on Chalamayid, right? On Yom Tiv itself, l'shmo, for the sake of Pesach, you'd be pater, shalo l'shmo chayiv. Says the Gemara, Taima de shalo l'shmo. The reason ultimately, again, that you are pater is because you offered up shalo l'shmo. The reason you're chayiv is because you offered up shalo l'shmo. Hastama pater. But if you were to offer up, I will say now the case that they're referring to over here is a case in which you were to offer up a Karban Pesach. If you were to offer up a Karban Pesach on Yom Tov itself, stama. Let's say you had an animal designated as a Pesach, you're now offering it up on Chalamayid. But the animal was originally set aside for Pesach, you're offering it up now on Chalamayid with absolutely no specific intent. What we call stam. So we'll say, so hastam, a pater. It sounds like you would be pater. Amai, Pesach b'shar yemos hashana, shlamim havi. Then I will say, now ultimately again, if I offer up a Pesach, if I offer up an animal that was designated as a Karban Pesach, but now I offer it up on Yom Tiv. So again, remember, I've missed my window of Erev Pesach. I'm now offering it up on Yom Tiv. Now, we saw this already last week. What's the status of a Pesach offered up during the rest of the year? So B'Pashtos, the Pesach offered up during the rest of the year is Ishlamim. So if that's the case, ultimately, again, why would I be pater? As Rabbi say, if I go ahead and I offer up a karban, right, that was designated as a Pesach, I offer it up on Yom Tiv, I'm in possession of chametz. Ultimately, again, why wouldn't one be chayiv? After all, that's called the shlamim. So the Gemara says, what do you see from here? Shamas mina, Pesach b'shar yemos hashana, by akira. So we'll say, this is very interesting. What do you see from here? You see from here that halacha l'maisa, if you have an animal so we'll say, this is a general kasha. If you have an animal designated as a Karban Pesach, and you offer it up during the rest of the year, but let's say you offer it up without any specific intent. So how is that animal viewed? Do we view that as a Pesach or do we view that as a Shlamim? The Gemara wants to suggest that you see from our Mishnah that the only way to undo the Pesach designation is to actively uproot it. Actively uproot it. That's when Shamas Mina Pesach B'Shar Yemos Hashana by Akira. That if you take an animal designated as your Karban Pesach and you offer it up during the rest of the year, in order for it to be classified as a shlamim, you must actively uproot its designation as a Pesach, And ultimately, again, then it becomes a shlamim. So we'll say, as opposed to saying, which kind of what we thought last week, which opposed to saying that no, whenever you offer up a Pesach during the rest of the year, it automatically becomes a shlamim. We'll say, why does it automatically become shlamim? Why? Why? Because it can't be a Pesach. Right? If it can't be a Pesach, if it can't be a Pesach, then ultimately, again, by definition, it becomes a shlamim. So you see from here that halacha lemaisa, in order to uproot the Pesach identity, you must actively do so. To which Gemara says, no. Rav Chiya bar Gamda, Nizru kami bichabura, Rav Chiya bar Gamda said, we learned in our chabur, in our group, Amru kigon, shayu bailim tmei. So we'll say, what's the case over here? The case where you had a chabura, or an individual for that matter, it doesn't really matter. They separated out a current Pesach, and I will say, let's say for argument's sake, on Erev Pesach, they become tummy. Before they get a chance to offer up the Karban Pesach, they become tummy. Now, by the way, it doesn't have to be that they become tummy in the Erev Pesach. They can become tummy sometime before Pesach as well. But the idea is, you have a chabura, they set aside an animal for Karban Pesach, then they become tummy. So we'll say, what happens if you become tummy? Not a problem. You have Pesach Sheni. In this case, the animal is actively set aside now for Pesach Sheni use. V'nitchen lePesach Sheni, destamei l'shum Pesach kai. So this is actually very interesting. If you look at Rashi, Rashi says, "Mipi chabura kulam hodu b'davar zeh lakumi masnisin demashmo debayle me'akar shem Pesach minei kigon shayu bailov tmeim ba'arbasar destamei l'shem Pesach Sheni kai." So we'll say this is actually quite fascinating. Listen to what the Gemara is saying. In general, if you have an animal set aside for Karban Pesach and you offer it up during some other time of the year, you do not have to actively uproot the Pesach identity. Rather, again, that animal is automatically reclassified as what? As a shlamim, with one exception. The one exception is if you had an animal set aside for Pesach, Karban Pesach, and then you became tamei. So therefore, by definition, you are automatically deferred to Pesach Sheni, in which case, the animal that you had set aside for Pesach Rishon is also what? Automatically deferred to Pesach Sheni. An animal that was automatically deferred to Pesach Sheni, that then is offered up sometime between Pesach Rishon and Pesach Sheni, remains Pesach, unless, of course, what? It's actively uprooted. So, you hear that distinction? In a regular case where you had an animal set aside as a Pesach, and then you offer it up during the rest of the year, when you offer that up, the Pesach identity is automatically dislodged, and it's looked at as a shlamim. But if you were going to offer up an animal on Pesach, but then you became tamei, so you were automatically deferred to Pesach Sheni, the assumption is that animal is going to be used for Pesach Sheni, and if you offer up that animal any time between Pesach Rishon and Pesach Sheni, in order for you to remove the Pesach identity, you must actively dislodge it. Incredible. Both say, now we come to an incredible piece of halacha, agarata, magnificent Gemara. Both say, you're going to see what's beautiful about this Gemara, this Mishnah now, and the Gemara afterwards, is every time you come to a Mishnah like this that paints a picture for you about how life was in the Beis Hamikdash, if you close your eyes, not while we're learning, but if you figuratively close your eyes, you could mamish see the scene unfolding right in front of you. You know, we say, Chadesh Yaminu Kikedem. We ask HaKadosh Baruch Hu to bring us back to the Beis Hamikdash, to bring the Bayit Shlishi, to bring us back to Eretz Yisrael, Emirat Hashem B'Karov. The Bible say these little Mishnayos give you this little bit. You'll see, it's overwhelming. Says the Mishnah, HaPesach Nishchat B'Shalosh Kitos. The Karban Pesach was shechted, ultimately again in three groups. Shene Amar, V'Shacha to also Kol Kehal Adas Yisrael. Kehal Ve'eda V'Yisrael. So we'll say, so number one, so which is interesting to note, is that there are always three groups for Karban Pesach. Right? There are always three shifts. Now, where do we get the three shifts from? Because again, the Mishnah quotes the Pasuk, because the Pasuk says, V'Shacha to also Kol Kehal Adas Yisrael. There are three words that are used to describe Klal Yisrael. So therefore, again, Kahal, Evda, Yisrael, therefore three groups for Shechting Karban Pesach. We'll say, listen, get ready for this. Nichnasa Kat Harishona, So when the first chevra came in, so what happens? So the azara, remember both say the courtyard of the Beis Hamikdash became full. Ninalu daltos azara. Na'alu. So we'll see what this means, but they closed the gates of the courtyard. So the size of the group was measured by the number of people who could be accommodated in the azara. So as soon as the courtyard was filled, they closed the doors. Taku, Heriyo, Vitaku, both say first wide line, Samech Dalid Amud Aleph, 64a. So they literally, again, they blew a tekiah, true, and a tekiah. HaKohanim Omdim Shuros. The Kohanim stood in a line. Now, both said, you have to imagine, I'm sorry, I should have, I'm going to send that a little bit later, just like the aerial view, the aerial photograph of the Beis HaMikdash, so that you could see this. So remember again, when you walk into the Beis HaMikdash, the first area is what we call the courtyard, which was a large open area. Then there were a series of steps, a platform, another series of steps down. When you went down those second series of steps, right in front of you was the Mizbeach, the large, what we call the Mizbeach HaNechoshes, the large altar made out of copper, which was used for animal sacrifice. So if you could imagine, the Jewish people, right, Klal Yisrael, now we'll see who's exactly coming in, but they come into the Azara, they're coming with their animals. They're coming with their sheep, coming to Korban Pesach. So what would happen? There would be lines of Kohanim. Now if you can imagine, lines of Kohanim extended from the Azara, over the steps, onto the platform, down the steps, all the way to the Mizbeach. So we'll say, now watch, it would be a deim, baziche kesef or baziche zav. The Kohanim were holding bowls made of gold, bowls made of silver, shura shekula kesef, v'shura shekula zav. Now both say in one row, either they were silver or gold. In other words, it didn't matter. You could use silver or gold, but the point over here is that every row, the row used the same material. So you wouldn't have in one row a bunch of people, some people holding gold, some people holding silver. But rather, again, in one row, it was either all gold or all silver. Lo hayu muhurabin. So both say they would not mix gold and silver. In other words, both say, I want to be clear. So you had two rows of kohanim. Now, one row could be gold, one row could be silver, but the idea is each row, was uniform. So again, either you're using gold or using silver. No mixing of matching of utensils within one row. We'll discuss why that is. Furthermore, the bowls that they used had pointed bottoms, did not have flat bottoms, in order that the Kohanim could not put down the blood. Because we'll say, as we're going to see, blood from every single carbon had to be applied to the Mizbeach. So if you put down, the concern was that in the rush of things, a Kohen might forget about the blood. Once the blood congeals, you can't do Zrika anymore. So therefore they were unable to put down the bowls, ensuring that Zrika would get done. Shachat Yisrael, so let's hear, listen to this. Here was the process. So Yisrael would shech the carbon. So we'll say they're shechting the carbonos in the Azara, right, in the courtyard. Remember again, normally, where were carbonos shechted? Right, remember, right by the Mizbeach, there were those rings. Right, there were those rings. You would shech the carbonos. Now the truth is, you could shech the carbonos everywhere inside of the Beis HaMikdash, but here they were shechting the carbonos inside of the courtyard. Shachat Yisrael, so Yisrael would shech the carbon. The kibel the coin would receive the blood. V'nosin lechavero makab. So remember again, now you see why they need the line. It's an assembly line. So what would happen? The Yisrael would shecht his carbon. The Kohen would do the Kabbalah, he would receive the blood, and then they would hand the blood down the line of the Kohanim. And the line, remember, would extend from the Azara all the way to the Mizbeach. So what happened? And what would happen? The Kohanim would hand the full bowl of blood and hand back the empty one. So this was the assembly line going back and forth from the Mizbeach. And the Kohen closest to the Mizbeach, now both, and interestingly enough, what you see from this Mishnah is he would Zorik means throw. He would throw all of the blood onto the base of the Mizbeach. So as opposed to regular Zrika, which was normally done like with a finger of the Kohen, by Korban Pesach, all of the blood was poured, but it was really thrown. It was thrown onto the base of the Mizbeach. Very interesting. So we'll say the first Chevra came out. Nichnasa kas shniya. Then the second group came in. Yatzas shniya, nichnasna shlishis. Suppose say this was the process. Kimase harishon, kachmase shniya vashlishis. And it was the same the process that the Gemara that the Mishnah just outlined was the same process used for all three groups. Suppose say, listen to how beautiful this is. Karu esahala. Suppose say, can you imagine this scene? Can you imagine what this must have been like? So you have the Azora filled with Jews. They're shechting the Karban Pesach, and they're singing Hallel. Can you imagine what that must have sounded like? A packed Azora singing Hallel. And it was for sure a Kalbach Hallel also. No Shaila. Right? Karu es Hallel im Gomlu Shanu. So let's listen to this. If they finished Hallel the first time, they would repeat it. Vim Shanu Shilshu. And again, if they finished it a second time, they both said they would keep on saying Hallel over and over, and it's incredible. Over and over and over until everybody finished. So the Gemara says, listen to this statement. Afal pi shelo shilshu miyamehem. Vim Shanu Shilshu al pi shelo shilshu miyamehem. So the Gemara says, we'll see what this means in just a moment. So the Mishnah says, but by the way, they never got to the third round of Hallel. In other words, they both said this was an efficient mechanism that had working over here. So the most they had to do was 2 rounds of Hallel. They never got to a third round of Hallel. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, miyameim shal kas shlishis, lo higia la'ahavti ki yishma Hashem mipisha amamu'atin. Shabbos say, so first the Mishnah says that they never had to get to a third round of Hallel. Rabbi Yehuda says, by the way, in the third chevron, the third group, they never even got up to la'ahavti. Ahavti ki yishma Hashem, which is towards the beginning of Hallel. They never even got up. Now, what Shabbos say, that means the first time through Hallel, they never even got up to ahavti. Why not? Because the third chabura, the third group, was always the smallest. Because again, everybody rushed in to get into the first Shabbos. I'll tell you something amazing. The Katzker Rebbe, Menachem Mendel of Katz, says something so beautiful. Listen to this. He writes, this is so beautiful. It's Miyameim Shal Kat Gimel. So the Mishnah says, for all the days by the third group, Lo Agia Lahafti Kishas. Listen to what the Katzker says. Kim Hayu Magir Lemadregas Ava, as Haim Lo Hayu Mikat Gimel, Ela Mikat Aleph. So the Katzker says, what does it mean? Miyameim Shal Kat Gimel Lo Agia Lahafti. So the third group, Kat Gimel, right? Kat Gimel never got to Ahavti. Why not, says the Katzker? What does it mean? Because if you got to Ahavti, you were part of Kat Aleph. You ready? Kat Gimel never got to Ahavti. If you got to Ahavti ki Yishma, if you love HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you weren't part of Kat Gimel. You were part of Kat Aleph. Which I've also said, Katzker is saying something amazing. Do you know how you demonstrate your love for something? How do you demonstrate your love for something? Through zrizos. Through zrizos, I will say. Again, being on time for something indicates my love for it. Right? If I love it, I'm there on time. If I'm late, I don't love it as much. That you can say that you love it, but Lamaisa, we're never late for things that are exceptionally important to us. So the Katzker says that's the pshat. What does he mean? Me'em shal kas gimel lo agia li ahavti. Right? All of the days of the third group, they never got to ahavti. Yeah, because if you're part of the third group, you're not exactly in the din of ahavti. If you're in love with the Ribono Shel Olam, you're part of Kat Aleph. If you're in love with Ribono Shel Olam, then it's Zrizin Makdimim Lemitzvos. It's a real Katzker vart. So the Gemara goes, the Mishnah goes right there. Ki ma'aseu b'chol, kach ma'aseu b'Shabbos. So also the same way. And there's so much to say on these Gemaras. Okay. The same way that they did during the week was the same way they did on Shabbos. Right. Ki ma'aseu, sorry. So we'll say it's the same process, weekday, Shabbos, all the same thing. We'll say one interesting thing, we'll see this in the Gemara a little bit. What they used to do is as follows. We'll say, if you could imagine this, this is all beautiful and spiritual, to bring you down to the world of the material for just a moment, the Beis HaMikdash, the Azara, was filled with blood. It was not, this is not for the faint. I often wonder about this, right? Like all of this, the halal, sign me up for the halal. being knee deep in blood, I don't know. I just don't know. I'll develop a thicker skin. So what they used to do, they said during the week, what they would do is as follows. There was a channel of water that ran through the courtyard of the Beis Hamikdash. So what they would do during the week is they would stop up the channel, flood the Azara, then open the channel back up, and essentially the water would wash out all of the blood and all of the shmutz. That's what they did during the week. The Kohanim did this on Shabbos as well, and the Rabbanim were not happy with the Kohanim for doing this. Again, we'll discuss in greater depth in the Gemara, but that was a point of contention. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Kos Hayim Emale Midamat Haroves. Rabbi Yehuda said that they would, and when they were finished with everything, a Kohen or the Kohanim would pick up a cup of blood. And both saying now that blood at the end of the day, or maybe at the end of each group, was kind of a composite, was a mixture of all of the bloods. They did one zrika on the mizbeach, which was like a combination of all of those bloods. However, the Chachamim did not like this. Okay, again, we'll see what exactly the problem was. Keitzad toladu mafshitin. So we'll say, now remember again, after you shech the Korban Pesach, you have to flay it. Right? You have to remove the skin. So how do they do that? So unkolios shal barza hayukvuim b'ksalim uba'amudim. So we'll say, so remember again, they had iron hooks. They had iron hooks that were on the wall as well as on the pillars. This is still in the Beis Hamikdash. Shebahen tolid umafshitin. They would hang the animal on these hooks and they would flay the animal like that. Kol mi she'in lo makom litlosu lahafshit. So we'll say, whoever didn't have a place to go, I mean, let's say they're out of hooks. You didn't get a hook fast enough. No problem. Maklos dakim v'chalokim hayusham. They had thin pieces of wood. So what would you do? So the Gemara says, Maniach al kseva v'al chavero v'tolu mafshit. So we'll say, if you couldn't get a hook, what would you do? You'd come with your chaver. You would each take, right? You take one of these wooden poles. You would put one on your shoulder. You would put one on his shoulder. You'd suspend the animal in between you, and you'd flay the animal like that. Rabbi Eliezer says, Amud Beis Yud Dalid Shechalios b'Shabbos. If Erev Pesach falls on Shabbos, then ultimately, again, maniach yodo al kasef chavero, v'yad chavero al ksefo v'tola umafshit. So both said, this is actually very interesting. So Rabbi Eliezer says that when Erev Pesach fell out on Shabbos, you can't use the sticks. You can't use the staffs. Now, Rashi says over here, it's because you can't make the staffs, which sounds like they were actually fashioning the staffs on Shabbos itself, which would be a problem maybe of Tikkun Kli, Tikkun Mana. We're going to see, Rabbi, that there are others who suggest that it's actually a problem of Muktzah. Okay, but again, remains to be seen. So on Shabbos, you wouldn't use the staffs. Instead, what do? You put your hand on your friend's shoulder, your friend puts your hand on your shoulder, you essentially suspend the animal between you, and you flay it like that. Karo votias amurav. So you open up the animal, you take out the sacrificial parts, nos no bet magis, and you put it in a bowl. Victoria Gab Mizbeach, then the Kohen would take it and ultimately go ahead and offer it up on the Mizbeach. Yatzasa Kas Harishona. So we'll say, so now remember again, now we've seen the process inside of the Beis HaMikdash itself. Now we'll say, remember, once you finish flaying your animal and the sacrificial parts are removed, now of course the remaining piece is, you have to roast it. So we'll say, obviously roasting did not happen in the Beis HaMikdash. Roasting happens somewhere in Yerushalayim. So what happens? So we'll say, so now here's what's interesting. So on a regular Erev Pesach, that was not Shabbos. That after you finish your shechting, flaying, offering up a sacrificial part, you take your animal out and you find your spot in Yerushalayim to go ahead and roast your Korban Pesach. However, if Erev Pesach falls out on Shabbos, it's a little bit different. So we'll say, now obviously you can't roast it until Motzei Shabbos. So look what happened. Yotzes HaKas HaRishona, the Yashrala B'Harabayis. So we'll say again, when Erev Pesach fell out on Shabbos, the chaburas, the groups, would essentially stay put until after Shabbos was over. Now the problem is, of course, you can't have everybody remain in one place because there's not enough space. So the first group, which was the first one in, right? First one in, and therefore again, first one out. What they call in accounting FIFO, right? First in, first out. So Yatzas HaKas HaRishona, where did they go? So ultimately, Yashala B'Harabayis. They situated themselves in the Harabayis. Okay? Shnia Bechel, the second Chevra, so they settled in the Chel, which Rabbi said was an area right outside of the Ezras Noshim. Vashlishes Bimkoma Omedes. And the third group actually stays in the Azara, in the courtyard itself. Good. So first group went out onto the Harabayas, second group right out of the Ezras Noshim, third group remains in the courtyard, in the Azar, until after Shabbos is over. The Gemara says, Chashecha, once Shabbos is over, Yatsu v'tzalu es Pischai. And then they went out and they roasted their Pesach. I will say, isn't that beautiful? Isn't that a magnificent Mishnah? So now you can see in your mind, right, the imagery of how Erev Pesach actually played out in the Beis HaMikdash, both on a regular day as well as on Shabbos. Beautiful. So we'll say, here we go. Amar Rav Yitzchak, Eina Pesach nishchat ela begimel kito shel shloshim b'nei adam. So it's very interesting. Rav Yitzchak says, so we'll say, the Mishnah already told me that we have three groups for the Shech to give Karban Pesach, right? Based on the pasuk that says, Kol Kehal Adas Yisrael. Kahal Eda Yisrael. Therefore, by definition, three groups. Comes along Rav Yitzchak and he says, by the way, those three groups must be made up of a minimum of 30 people each. 30 people each. Now, we'll say, now, why is that? My timer, Kahal ve'ed v'yisrael misafkilon ibe ba'asachos ibe zachazek. Because we'll say, without getting into all of this now, we know elsewhere that those terms, Kahal, Eda, and Yisrael, all represent a minimum of 10 people. So the shaila now is like this. I know I need three groups. The shaila is, are the three groups operate concurrently or consecutively? So I will say, if it's concurrently, that means I need a minimum of 30 people in the basement at any time. If it's consecutively, then maybe it's only ultimately what? 10 at a time. So because we're not sure, Hilchach, ba'inan shalosh kitos, shal shloshim b'nei adam. Therefore we'll say we make sure that we have a minimum of three groups of 30 people each. That way, first, why line samachtel on the days, tiba ba'asachas ha'ika, that way, if I need 30 at once, I have them. And if it's one after the other, I have it as well. Hilchach b'chamisha namisag. That's why even if you have only 50 people, it's okay also. Why? The Aili Tvasin, and the first group will let 30 go in. Va'avdi. Aili Asara b'nafik Asara. We'll let 10 people go out, 10 more people go in. And then subsequently again, Aili Asara b'nafik Asara. Then we let another 10 people go in and 10 more people come out. So you would have all the Gemara is just pointing out, I will say, is that even if you just had a group of 50, that would still allow us to maintain 30 at every Chabura. Good. So both say, I just want to point out, remember, I know what you're thinking to yourself. You're thinking to yourself, how does this possibly work? How can you have all of Klal Yisrael represented in three shifts? So remember, we're going to see this in just a moment, but remember, there was only one representative per Chabura who went in with the animal. In other words, we'll say, let's say for argument's sake, we're a Chabura of people. So we don't all go to the Beis HaMikdash. We appoint one guy. I'm going to ask maybe if you appoint me. Let me do it, please. Right, so we appoint one guy. One guy goes, and that's it. So you have to understand. So as we're going to see, every lamb essentially represented a minimum, we're going to see, of like 10 people. So when you think about those numbers, and the Azara was quite large and it was packed, when you think about that, and I want to point out something else, not every person came to do Karban Pesach. So remember again, you had people who were Tameh. They weren't doing Pesach Rishon. You had people who were Derech Rechoka, too far, they weren't doing. So it wasn't all of Am Yisrael. So the point is, and I was working a little bit backwards, it worked. How do we know it worked? Because it worked. Because the Mishnah said it worked. So it's hard to imagine, but somehow you got all of Klal Yisrael in like this. So the Gemara goes right there. So both say this is great. Nichnasa Kas Rishon. Say Itmar. Both say get ready for this. Remember the Mishnah said the first group would come in, and then the doors of the Azara would close. So I'll say, now watch this. Itmar. So Nichnasa Kas Rishon. Itmar. Abai Amar Nin Alutinan. Rava Amar No Alintanan. Abai says Nin Alu. Nin Alu means the doors were closed, or the doors closed. Abai says it was a miracle. It was a miracle. What would happen? I will say, how would they know when they had enough people in the Azara they had to close the doors? The doors miraculously closed. When the Azara was full, the doors closed themselves. That's what it means, Nin Alu. Nin Alu, they closed. Rava Amar no alin. Rava says no. It doesn't mean. Rava says they closed. Shabbos say different gear. So Abaye says the doors were closed, miraculous. It was a miracle. Rava says ultimately again they were closed by the Kohanim. So the Gemara says, "My beinahu." So we'll say, what's the nafkamina between these two opinions? Eika beinai lemismach anisa. Can you rely on miracles? So we'll say, Abayi would say you could rely on miracles, and we keep on allowing people into the Azara until the doors close themselves. Rava says, no, we don't rely on miracles. You do your ocular intake. You see how many people are in the Azara. Does it look too full, not look too full? The moment it looks too full, you close the doors. So I'll say, I want to point out something very interesting. So let me finish this. Abayi Amar, Nen alutnan, kama da'ili malu, v'samchina anisa. Abayi says you let as many people in as possible. And then when HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants you to cut off the first group, so to second group, the doors will close on their own. And we rely on a miracle. Rava Amar No'alim Tanan. Rava says, no, we don't rely on miracles. You close the doors yourself. V'lo samchina anisa. And we do not rely on miracles. Now I will say, I want to point out, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, everybody knows, lo somchin alanis, right? We don't rely on miracles. So I want to point out something very important over here. It's true. We don't rely on miracles when? Under natural circumstances and in the regular world. The Beis Hamikdash is a olam bifnei atzmo. The Beis Hamikdash was a place of perpetual miracles. Remember again, I will say everything from the fire that came down from the heavens, to the pillar of smoke that came off of the Mizbech HaKitoras that never wavered, to the point where Amar Adam Sali Amakam, all of the Klai Yisrael was able to fit in. The Beis Hamikdash was a place of miracles, and that's because the Beis Hamikdash is the meeting point between this world and HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the celestial abode. So because of that, it was not regulated by the same laws. So right, in the Welt, in the world, in our daily lives, in Somchin Alanes, you do not rely on miracles. You have to go ahead and put in proper Ishtadlus. In the Beis Hamikdash, it's a different story. Sabai says in the Beis Hamikdash, Samchin Alanes. You let people into the Beis Hamikdash until the doors close themselves. Rava says no. Even in the Beis Hamikdash, you do not rely on miracles. In other words, if God wants to perform miracles, that's God's business. But anything that we have, any process we have to manage, we manage ultimately again under normative circumstances. So let's get ready for this. The Gemara says, this is incredible. So the Gemara says, V'hadisnan Arab Yehuda, Chas v'shalom sha'akavya ben Mahalalel nisnada. Chas v'shalom that Akavya ben Mahalalel was put in Chayrin. Now both say, what happened with Akavya ben Mahalalel? Both say, take a look at Rashi. This Gemara is just incredible. Chas v'shalom, listen to this. B'meseches Edyos, Tnan, Arba Dram Heid Akavya ben Mahalalel. B'katani Hasam, Hu haya omer, in Mashkin, Lo as hagioris, v'lo as ha-mishuchreres. So both say, Akavya ben Mahalalel said, that we do not administer sota waters. Remember again, if a woman is suspected of adultery, there's a process of sota. Akavya ben Mahalalel says, we do not give sota waters to a giores, to a convert. Amrulo, Maisib b'karkome shivcha, shaisib yushain v'eshkoa shmai v'avtalion. I bet they said, Akavya, really? But there was a story of a giores, who was suspected of adultery, and Shmai and Avtalion, two great sages, gave her to drink sota waters. Amar lahem dugma hishkua. So Akavya ben Mahalalel says, that's because she was like them. Now I've said, Shmai and Avtalion were descendants of Gerim, right? They were descendants of converts. So Akavya ben Mahalalel spoke about them a little bit disparagingly and said, yeah, of course, they gave the Gioras the drink because she was just like them. So Akavya ben Mahalalel spoke disparagingly of Shmai and Avtalion. As a result, what happened? And ultimately, again, they excommunicated him. So they put Akavya ben Mahalalel. Akavya ben Mahalalel is one of the Gedolei Hadar, but they put him ultimately again in nidui. They put him in excommunication because he spoke disparagingly of Shmai and Avtalion. I will say, so just what an important lesson for us, right? Especially again in a time where it is so commonplace to speak disparagingly about anyone and everyone. Tamdi Chachamim, religious leaders, your fellow, it doesn't make a difference. We'll say, see here you have Akavya ben Mahalalel, who was the Gadol Hadar, one of the Gedolei Hadar. And because he spoke disparagingly about Shmai and Avtalion, they put him in Cherem. What an important lesson to sensitize us, not just about how we speak about Gedolei Hadar, how we speak about anyone and everyone. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Yehuda, Chas v'shalom, shakab mahalal and so Rabbi Yehuda says, no, you got the story wrong. They never put a kabim mahalal in chayrim. Why not? Rabbi here we go. Shein azara nin elas al kol adam b'yisrael b'chacham b'yira u'b'yira ascheda kabim mahalal. Because Rabbi say, the doors of the azar never closed upon someone as great as a kavya ben mahalalo, with wisdom and with yiras chet as a kabim mahalal. So both say. So I just want to point. So the point over here the Gemara is making is, what does it say? The doors of the azar are never closed on someone as great in chachma and yiras chet as a kabim mahalal. What does this seem to support? This seems to support Abaye, or we'll see. Right? But it's the doors of the azar are closing on their own. I just want to point out. Look how the Gemara describes the greatness of the kavya ben mahalalo. Chachma, wisdom, and yiras chet, fear of sin. So Rabbi say, Chachma by itself is never enough. Right? Chachma is wonderful. Wisdom is great. But unless wisdom is tempered by yiras chet, unless wisdom is tempered by a fear of sin, wisdom easily breeds arrogance. It is only wisdom that is accompanied by yiras chet that becomes a true credit to the individual. Abai mitaris l'tamei, Rava mitaris l'tamei. So we'll say both Abai and Rava read this line in accordance with their own positions. Abai mitaris l'tamei, ein barzar b'shashin in elas al kol adam b'yisrael b'chacham yiras chet ka'akam mahal. So Abai reads it like supporting his position. Abai says, the gates of the Azara never closed upon someone who was as great as chachma and yiras chet as a kabim mahalo. It's meaning what? That the gates of the Azara closed miraculously themselves. Rava mataris atame. Rava reads it according to his reasoning. Ein ba'azara b'shash shenoalin osa al kol Yisrael. There was no one inside of the Azara at the time that they closed the gates who was as great in wisdom and yiras chet as a kavir b'mahala. So we'll say, so just an interesting machlokis. Machlokis Abaye and Rava, how did the doors of the Azara close? So we'll say, here's what we know. We know that obviously at some point in time, they had to close, or the doors of the Azara had to close in order to signal first group, done. Second group, done. So how did the doors close? Machlokis Abaye and Rava. Abaye says, they closed miraculously. Yechash Baruch Hu decided when the group was closed out. Rava says, no, there was no miracle, because no, there's no miracle here. Ultimately, again, they closed the doors. I guess the Kohanim or someone closed the door and they decided the Azara was full enough. We'll say, what's the fundamental machlokes? What's fundamental machlokes? Do we say somchin alanes b'makom hamikdash hazal? Which Rabbi say means it's such a profound hashkafic machlokes as well. Is there ever a time when we rely on miracles in Olam Hazeh or not? To which Rava will say, no. In this world, we do not rely on miracles. And even in the Beis HaMikdash itself, you don't rely on miracles. Everything is based on your hishtadlus, of course, with Siyata D'Shmaya. And I will say what Abaye says is something amazing. Abaye says it's not true. In general, in the world, in Somchin Alanes. But there does come a certain point in time when you come into the Beis HaMikdash that ultimately, again, your hishtadlus ends and the place of nisim begins. And if you think about this on a hashkafic level, what Abaye is also saying is even in the world, you have to put in your hishtadlus, but perhaps there does come a certain point in time where you say, I've put in my hishtadlus, and now the rest of this being the success of this particular endeavor, ultimately again is up to you. Is there ever a point in time where I kind of throw it back to God? Abaye will say yes, Rava will say no. A fundamental machlokes in Hashkaf HaSachar. And I will say quite an amazing machlokes. Incredible. So we'll say the Gemara goes right. By the way, it's not too late to take your Daf Yomi notebooks, because these are the kind of suggestions. So we'll say, you must be writing these things down, because you know what's going to happen. In 2 days from now, this is going to be kichalam ya'of, like a fleeting dream, right? We're going to forget this. So we'll say, you don't have to use a Daf Yomi notebook, but somewhere, whether it's in the margins of your Gemara, whether you've been, we'll say, please, I beg you, because in a 7.5 year cycle, where we move at lightning speed, do not depend on your power of retention to remember any of these Gemaras. You're going to forget it. These are the kind of Gemaras you say over at your Shabbos table. These are the kind of Gemaras you say over at your dinner table. These are the kind of Gemaras when you want to make elevator talk with someone. But I say, by the way, did you see Pesachim? What are you going to talk about? The ravens, the this, the that? We say, these are the kind of things, right? Halavai, we should get to the level that our small talk is Daf Yomi. We'll say, but please, I beg you, find a way to remember and to retain these Gemaras. Tan Rabbanon, Me'olam lo nismaich adam ba'azara. Here's another great Gemara. A person was never nismaich, Rabbi say literally means crushed. Right? A person was never crushed in the Azara, chutz mi Pesach echad, except for one Pesach. It did happen one time. As I will say, what it means is, now crushed doesn't mean like, what it just means is, as much as there were a lot of people there, it was never like to the point where it was uncomfortable. Except for 1 year when it was. Because Pesach echad, shaya b'mei Hillel, shenismaich bo zakin echad, where one older guy got a little crushed. Vayikorin also Pesach mu'uchim. And they called it the crushed Pesach. Okay? Tana Abanan. Pamachos Bikesh Agrippa Samachbos. Listen to this beautiful story. One time, we'll say, by the way, we don't have time for it now, but because we're Mashad, but we'll say, I just want to point out that story is very strange. No, that story is very strange. Look in the Maharsha comments on this particular story. There's a message about saying all of these things about, remember, the fact that no one ever got crushed, that's a reference ultimately to the fact that everyone was acting Baratzon Hashem. When you act Baratzon Hashem, everything works out. If somebody's getting crushed, that means there was something wrong on that Pesach. That's your homework. We'll say one time, King Agrippas. And I will say King Agrippas is an interesting figure who we learn about it in Maseches Sukkah. So one time King Agrippas was a Jewish king. Now whether Agrippas was fit to be king or not is a whole other discussion. But King Agrippas was a very good man. He was a tzaddik. Again, whether he was fit for Malucha, when I say fit, meaning genealogically fit, is a different discussion. So the Gemara says, one time King Agrippas wanted to see the size of the Jewish people, the count of the Jewish people. So what did he say? So Amr le Kohen Gadol, Tein einecha bepesachim. So he said to the Kohen Gadol, do me a favor. There's a great way to kind of get an idea as to the number of the Jewish people. See how many Karban Pesachs I brought. So many Karbanos I brought. Tell me the number of Karban Pesachs. So what did the Kohen Gadol do? So Nata Kulya Mikol Echad. So the Kohen Gadol took a kidney from every Karban Pesach. He took a kidney. V'nimtza, what it says? V'nimtza sham shishim ribo zuge klayos. We'll say, so the Kohen Gadol had 600,000 pairs of kidneys. Which will say sounds like what? 1.2 million kidneys. Right? 1.2 million kidneys. Rabbi say, now understand, right? 600,000 pairs. And Rabbi say, whenever like the Gemara counts pairs, it's always a machlokes as to whether pairs should be counted as times 2 or just, so this is saying over here ultimately 600,000 kidneys, but let's go with the count of 600,000 pairs of kidneys, kiflayim kiotzi Mitzrayim, which sounds like 2 times as many Jews who left Egypt. So there were 600,000 men between the ages of 20 and 60. There were 1.2 million kidneys, 1.2 million karbanos. I will say, B'pashtos, this is probably a little bit hyperbolic, but Lamaisa, what it means is a lot of karbanos. A lot of karbanos. Now, if you go at that number, by the way, it's actually not such a crazy number if you think about it, because I will say if you have 1.2, well, it is a very crazy number. If you have 1.2 million, right, 1.2 million kidneys, 1.2 million karbanos, right now, so I will say, so b'pashtos, well, whatever the math is, he says, it means twice as many as the Jews who left Egypt, which means, again, there's 1.2 million karbanos. The Gemara says, now that doesn't include chutz mitame shai b'derech choka. And I will say that excludes the people who were tamei and too far away to offer up the Pesach. Furthermore, ve'im lecha Pesach hu Pesach shal nima lav yosim asara bnei Adam. So I'll say ultimately again, and remember, every karban had at least 10 people. Every chabura had at least 10 people who were part of it. So we'll say, so that is an enormous number of Jews. An enormous number of Jews. Now, if you do the math of here, I'll say what that makes it over is more than 13 million Jews. So we'll say, so again, b'pashtos, the number is not that high, but lamaisa, again, just a little indication as to the incredible enormity of Klal Yisrael. Vayikorin osa Pesach Mu'uvin. I will say they called that year literally the fat Pesach, right? Or the thick Pesach. That Baruch Hashem, so many Jews, so many Karbanos Pesach. So Rabbi says, 1 second. Natal Kulya, how is the Kohen Gadol able to take a kidney? Ha by Akture. We'll say the kidney is one of the sacrificial parts that has to be burnt on the Mizbeach. So we'll say, remember again, it sounds like what the Kohen Gadol is doing, he's taking out a pile of kidneys, and he shows Agrippas, look at the pile of kidneys. The kidneys have to be burnt on the Mizbeach. The Hadr Makjalu. No. The Kohen Gadol set aside the kidneys, and then afterwards, after the pile of kidneys, then he burnt them on the Mizbeach. I've oksiv viktiru shaloya arev chalavav shalzeh. Shalzeh bazeh. But Rabbi say, I deposit the tiru. The way it works with sacrificial parts, Rabbi say, is the sacrificial parts of each animal must be burnt independently from the sacrificial parts of any other animal. So you can't just take a pile of kidneys and burn them all together. This is the Gemara says, the hadir maktiluhu chada chada. What it means is afterwards the Kohen Gadol burnt each kidney one at a time. I vatanya viktirum shekulo ke'echad. But 1 second, Rabbi say the pasuk says that you're really supposed to burn the sacrificial parts of an animal all together at once. Rabbi say that the sacrificial parts of every animal are supposed to be burned together as one unit. Ella tfisa ba'almad b'shakla minaya ad yavin le midiachini. Rather, Rabbi say what happened over here is like this: the Kohen Gadol took a kidney, but then they replaced the kidney with something else. Rashi puts out like a bean or a rock. So the point over here is they burnt the sacrificial parts, but the idea is that the Kohen Gadol had a pile, whatever it is, he marked each kidney with a stone. So he didn't have a pile of kidneys, he had a pile of stones. But the point is, through the pile of stones, we were able to see the sheer volume of the number of karbanos that were brought. Kohanim omnim shuros. So I will say, ultimately, again, the Kohanim were standing in lines. So the Gemara says, now remember, the Mishnah said they were able to use silver bowls or gold bowls. But whatever they were using in one line, it was uniform throughout the line. So the Gemara says, my time, what's the reason? If you want to say because ultimately, again, maybe what's going to happen, if it's gold and silver mixed, maybe Rabbi says the assembly line is going towards the Mizbeach, so Kohen A gives to Kohen B a gold bowl, and then Kohen B gives back to Kohen A a silver bowl. Ultimately, and I will say, then what happens? If, remember, in general, we have a concept of malin mitzvos ve'in moridin, right? Or malin b'kodesh ve'in moridin. We go up, we don't go down in Kedusha. Well, if Kohen A is handing to Kohen B a gold bowl, and then he gets back from Kohen B to Kohen A a silver bowl, essentially that's going down in Kedusha, right? I'm handing gold, and I'm getting back silver. So is there a problem of malin b'kodesh ve'in moridin? Well, see, even with gold, what's to say that Kohen A won't hand Kohen B a gold bowl worth 100 zuz, and he's going to get back something only worth 50 zuz? Isn't that problematic? Ella, the hachi shapir tvei. Rather, Rabbi say, the Gemara says, no. What is this about? This is about the aesthetic. The aesthetic. The Rabbi say, if you could imagine, it just looks much more beautiful when everything is uniform. So therefore, again, you could use gold or you could use silver, it doesn't matter, but whatever you were using in a particular line, it had to be uniform. Why? It's not an issue of value, it's an issue of aesthetic. So also we'll do one more line. So remember again, I will say the bowls themselves did not have a flat bottom; they had a pointed bottom, so that the coin could not put it down in order that the blood should not congeal. In general, all of the bowls of the Beis HaMikdash did not have a flat bottom, because in general, you did not want bowls which contained blood to be able to be put down, because if they could be put down, they could congeal, and then you can't do zrika. With one exception, chutz. But also with the exception of the bowl which contained the frankincense for lechem haponim. Also remember again, lechem haponim, showbreads which were placed on the shulchan. There were also two ladlefuls of frankincense, of levona, that were put on the shulchan. Every other bowl or container in the Beis HaMikdash that had a pointed bottom so you couldn't put it down, with the exception of the bowls for the levona. Those had flatter bottoms. Why? Because Rabbi say, since those bowls were put on the shulchan next to the lechem haponim, what was the concern? The concern was if they had a pointed bottom, because they are put next to the bread, they may puncture the lechem haponim. So as to avoid puncturing the lechem haponim, they had flat bottoms. Right? Rabbi say, we'll have to stop over here. Rabbi say, we will pick up. Right? I feel like, no? Didn't I tell you? Was it incredible? Is it incredible? Incredible. So I'll say, and by the way, it's not over. It's not over. Tomorrow's daf, and choose both the next couple of days. Incredible agarata, incredible halacha. Ashinu matov chalkinu manaim garinu ma'afay yirushasin. Rabbi Yosef Shekayach. All right, Chevron, soon. Everyone have a wonderful day.